Thank you for listening to episode 16 of the Kindness Rebellion. In this episode, I spoke with Chris Wei. Chris is currently getting his PhD in film studies at the University of Iowa. The main reason I wanted to talk to Chris today was based on his expertise in film and kind of asking him questions about my new relationship with film, because as of late, I've been really seeing film as a type of propaganda in a lot of ways, where I feel like the messages and ideologies that are being presented to me aren't really what I want to have in my consciousness. And Chris was great and pretty much acting as my therapist in this episode, as he was able to give me a new perspective on film and how we can use the insights and perspectives that we gain from film in order to make real change in our environment. This is really valuable for me because, part of me was like, I guess I should just stop watching movies. I should stop watching film. But the truth is that I actually really like movies and I love film. It's a very captivating experience. And Chris was able to give me some very valuable insights. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Do whatever it is you do to let me know you like the podcast. And hope you enjoy. Thanks. This is a podcast about rejecting tyranny and oppression by cultivating both systemic and individual change. I believe the only way to create this kind of monumental change is to inspire understanding, love, and kindness. From there, we can work to embody these essential values in our cultural systems and in our individual lives. My hope is that by effectively communicating with anyone and everyone, we can establish a shared vision for humanity and explore new ways of living to build a better world for all of us. I'm your host, Nathan Jones, and this is the Kindness Rebellion. Hey,
Right.
Chris. Thank you so much
Hey.
for coming on to the Kindness Rebellion, man. I really appreciate you agreeing to come on here. I remember a long time ago, we decided to talk in a coffee shop about
Yeah.
like the nature of reality and truth and like religion and all these things. What did we call it? It was a pasta
Pasta
coffee.
coffee. Yeah.
Yes. Dude, that conversation honestly it turned me on to the fact that you're a very open and very smart person, and I love your opinions and the way that you see the world. So I really appreciate you coming on here, man. It's an awesome opportunity for me.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. And then I've also loved like your passion for film and the way that you see film. If you just want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit and talk about kind of your history there and like why you like film, I'd love to start there.
Sure. Why I like film. I think I've always been drawn to film since I was young, like movies like The Iron Giant or Jurassic Park were very formative for me. I think The Truman Show was probably the first film that really um, opened my eyes to what these stories could do for me as art or as this like mind opening exercise.
Mhm.
And I was quite young when that came out, but I remember that was one of the first that kind of got me thinking differently about what film is or what my relationship to it could be.
Mhm.
But yeah, just to introduce who I am now. I mean, I'm a PhD student at University of Iowa studying film studies. Um, but I wasn't always in this field. I mean, despite loving film from a young age, I did my undergraduate in psychology and philosophy, worked in the mental health field for a number of years um, throughout, like 2012 to 2016, 17 or so. That I was working in like residential treatment centers, therapeutic boarding schools, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, I think I met you shortly after pivoting from that career and was kind of in a transition space between doing that and applying to grad schools. And then I went to Boston to get a master's in film and television studies. And now here I am in Iowa. Um, but yeah, just decided throughout my teaching career and my career in mental health that like the thing that I got most excited about, the thing that I was most passionate about was teaching these students how to engage with stories and art and how to appreciate things like film, for example. Um, and yes, friends clued me into this whole world of, well, there's a field for that. There's a thing called
Yeah.
film studies. You should go into it. And I realized this thing that I'd been studying on my own, kind of for free. There's actually a whole world of people who make that their life, of not just filmmakers but film students, film scholars. And ever since I learned that was a viable path. That's the path I've been on. It's been really exciting.
Yeah.
But yeah, just always have loved film. Mostly, when I was younger for narrative reasons, for the stories that it tells. But lately, I've discovered that maybe narrative isn't even the most important thing. Maybe it's just
Mm.
the act of seeing a motion picture or a body in motion or a face, or these little kind of non-narrative moments can be just as poignant or powerful or meaningful as a quote unquote story in a
Mm-hmm.
traditional sense. But regardless of how my philosophy of film shifts over time, I've always been really intoxicated by what it is,
Yeah.
for sure.
That's so cool. And honestly, I remember I was surprised when you told us like, "Hey, I'm getting my master's degree in film studies," and I was like, "What? Like, there's a thing for that? Like, you can
Yeah,
go to school
yeah.
for that?" But and then I just kind of realized that as I've just been going through life, film is becoming more and more present, even just like video and just like the narrative, and even just like you said, kind of that visual stimulation in general is just becoming more and more a part of our everyday lives. And I think it's really cool that you were able to see not only just like its value in narrative and its value in, pretty much any of your experience with film, but you're just able to learn from it and teach people about it too, which I think is really, really cool. And I think that just really segues me into my first big question is like, what do you think film teaches us about like society, about like being human? What,
Hmm.
what do we really learn from that? What does it do for us?
I think there's this quote from Roger Ebert that always has stood out to me, where he says that films are like empathy generating machines,
Mm,
which I don't know. I've grown more and more ambivalent about like that machine metaphor and whether or not there's this deterministic kind of relationship, right?
yeah,
Of what film generates or what it does. I think varies from person to person, from situation to situation.
definitely.
When you bring your body into a movie theater, you're bringing with it all of these past traumas, experiences, biases,
Hmm.
values, right? So it's not a machine. I disagree with Ebert in that sense, but I think the broader point that he's gesturing towards, I agree with this idea that like film is capable of inviting us into an empathetic relationship with identities or experiences or events that maybe we don't have any immediate experience of, right? you can
Yeah.
you can see a character on film or a person or even a cartoon that represents something that you've never known in real life, or that you've never experienced, or that you've never been through, or that you've never heard someone talk about. And I think film has a very visceral quality to it, where you're not just engaged with it on an intellectual or um, metaphorical or conceptual level, but like on a bodily level, you
Mm,
you feel a film, right?
yeah.
I'm borrowing a lot from Vivian Sobchak writes a lot about this in an essay called "What My Fingers Knew," and talks
Hmm.
about like feeling a film in her fingers, in her body. And
Ooh.
I really think that, to answer your question of like what film teaches us, I think it just teaches us to feel in ways that
Mm,
maybe we wouldn't, just like any art. It
yeah.
it teaches us to experience and to immerse in things that maybe we wouldn't otherwise encounter.
Yeah.
And because, like you said, it's so widespread and there's media and film everywhere, it's one of the most maybe pop accessible versions of that
Hmm.
kind of thing, which sculpture and painting can do as well. But
Yeah.
people are very immersed in film and television and social media videos and things like
Hmm.
that in a way that maybe they're not as immersed in when it comes to sculpture or painting or
Yeah.
etc. Right?
I really like the idea of it being as sort of like an empathetic experience or something that really cultivates empathy. Because, I mean, for one thing, I like how it really is a very captivating experience. It does have that physical experience to it where you really are becoming, it's just capturing. In
Yeah.
psychology, they'll talk about how a video will create like a visual capture, or sorry, like our five senses. We tend to prioritize the visual field, and we have that visual capture where we just
Yeah.
really prioritize visual information. So it kind of makes sense that movies are just such a good way of helping us take in information, especially like someone else's point of view. So I really like that you point that out. It's interesting how that like I think a lot of people may not even watch films and realize that it actually is like giving them this sort of empathetic experience.
Yeah,
And I'd kind of love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think a lot of people would, or I guess the way I see it, I sort of see people watching movies and television and stuff in a way that is meant mostly for distraction.
sure.
But there are so many ways that it can actually be like not just educational, but very profound and very important. So I'd love to get kind of like your thoughts on that, because do you see that as an issue? Do you think there's simply a place for it, or do you think it's kind of distracting?
That's a good question. Yeah, and I think this is part of why I have a fraught or ambivalent relationship to that Roger Ebert quote, because according to his metaphor, it's, a machine that generates empathy implies that it's the machine's going to run as long as the machine's turned on, right? It's going to do
Mm,
X, Y, and Z, and that's not always the case. We are always confronting films. We're renegotiating with them. You can walk out of a very deeply empathetic and progressive and thoughtful and nuanced film and still have reactionary or harsh or cruel ideologies in your heart.
yeah,
It's not the case that an eye-opening film will inevitably open eyes, right? Because
yeah.
we all choose how to respond to things.
Mm,
But there is something so it's like I want to play both sides of that fence, right? Because there, on one hand, we all have this like ability to be captivated by or be resistant to um, art and stories
mm, mhm,
and whatever. But on the other hand, there is something like uh, ineffably capturing and um, sensory about what film
mm,
does or what it is. So one answer to your question is like, yeah, absolutely. People who think of film as just distraction, or films that think of themselves as just distraction, um, can be a counterpoint to this maybe lofty or uh, optimistic or utopian view that I've put forth.
mhm.
But on the other hand, the counterpoint to that I think is worth considering is that even people who think that they don't think about film deeply, or
Yeah.
who think that they're not moved by film, or who think that film is just a thing that they put on when they're cooking or just to
Mhm,
distract them, or while they're folding laundry they put on a show. I think even those people, whether they acknowledge it or not, are being influenced by um, stories, bodies, spectacle, ideology, all the stuff that goes into play in what a film or what a television show is. No matter
mhm.
how shallow the film might be as far as its own aspirations about itself,
Yeah.
there's inevitably going to be ideology at play. There's going to be representation at play. There's going to be certain characters that are treated empathetically or not empathetically, right?
Mhm,
and
yeah.
and those like implicit messages are gonna seep through, um, whether or not we think we're uh, su- susceptible to that or looking for that or
Mhm.
interested in that, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I guess that kind of, with your proclivity for film and just how much of a, I would say, like, a reverence you have for it, are there, like, really any movies that you just don't like? Like, are there movies that
Mm.
you're just like, "This shouldn't have existed. This should have never been made." Or is it more like, "You know what? I can see everything for what it is, and I can value it for what it is."
Oh, that's a very good question. Like, um, I have often bristled at the idea that like, oh, such and such movie shouldn't exist or shouldn't have been made. I've
Mhm,
heard those arguments usually from a reactionary point of view of like, oh, this movie is too such and such, or it's too sympathetic to so and so, or it's
mhm,
too full of such and such type of content, and when
mhm,
I hear that kind of reactionary like recoil at a piece of art that is triggering or frustrating or challenging to people, I almost always want to invite them like, well, why don't you lean into that discomfort instead of insisting that the source of the discomfort needs to be banished? Why don't you lean
mhm.
into what that discomfort is and maybe find something generative there? The counter
Ooh,
argument to this, or the counterpoint that I also sympathize with, is like some film, some some art is poisonous, right? Some
yeah.
messages are toxic. So, some films are racist. Some films are
Mm,
steeped in ideology that um, is a really ugly thing to express, and the
mhm,
expression of it doesn't help us in the
mhm.
audience, right? And
Yeah.
I've watched films that I feel um, that I'm tempted to say like, I wish this didn't exist. I wish people weren't watching this. And
Yeah.
it's part of why I'm ambivalent, or like kind of playing both sides of this fence too, is
Hmm.
that um, I've been working in grad school for the past like 5 years, and part of my job is helping students confront even films that I think are doing like a shitty, ugly thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's worthwhile to become conversant with the ideas of, or to become knowledgeable of, and um, analytical of, and critical of media
Mm.
in a way that's nuanced and robust, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes those ugly, terrible films can be a good uh, learning experience for people who are figuring out what ideology even means or what it
Hmm.
looks like. You can look at something that's clearly, I don't know, propaganda, or
Hmm.
like, one of the most famous films, like Birth of a Nation, right, is
Mm.
famously very, very racist, um, kind of glorification of the Klan,
Hmm.
to the extent that it was even used as a recruiting video for
Hmm.
Klan, revival meetings and stuff decades after it was made. And so I think we can look back on that film in historical context and say like, oh yeah, that's an awful thing. I kind of wish it hadn't been made.
Hmm.
But 100 years later, it has been made. Like
Yeah.
we can't go to a world in which it hasn't been made. So maybe the most fruitful thing is, instead of wringing our hands about it having been made, is to become really good at recognizing what it's doing and how that works, because there are more subtle versions of the same film being made every year, right?
Yeah.
There are films that are obviously toxic, but then maybe the more pernicious thing is the films that are not so obviously toxic,
Hmm.
that are saying something poisonous in a way that feels nice,
Hmm.
or that
Ooh.
seems acceptable. If we say everything on this end of this side of a boundary shouldn't be made and everything on that side of a boundary should be made, then we're becoming comfortable, I think, with like, um, well, everything that's on the good side of that boundary I've made
Yeah.
is therefore unimpeachable and fine, and I
Hmm.
can consume it uncritically. And I think that's a mistake, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
like that. I specifically like that you hold this idea of just like needing to, it's sort of like a bit of emotional intelligence that you have to have when you're being confronted with these films, right? It's not a
yeah,
matter of saying like that is bad and we have to stop this, blah blah blah. It's more of, or make sure it never existed. Like, even though you said like it can't even be done, it's already existed.
yeah,
I like the idea that it's more about understanding our reaction and our interpretation of those in order to learn and grow from it. Because it was kind of like you said, if even if we maybe hadn't had the birth of a nation, that's what it was called, right? The birth of a nation.
yeah,
Even if we never had that, something else like it would have been made, because those ideas and those ideologies, those beliefs, those toxic beliefs were still present, and then it was just
yeah,
showing itself through film. And
yeah,
trying to get rid of the film is like getting rid of the symptom, not the cause. And I think like if we didn't actually watch that and get just the gut reaction like this is wrong, then we wouldn't
yeah,
have been able to make anything counter to it, or we couldn't have even risen to the point where that stuff shouldn't, we realize that that stuff should no longer be made.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
specifically you pointing out like the pernicious, as you said, I like that word, the pernicious films that really that kind of make it seem like it's okay. They sort of put a twist on it that make you feel like, oh, well, yeah, this is okay, this is acceptable. Because that was actually going to be my next question, is just how we handle those kinds of movies with just outdated ideas like racism, sexism, things like that. Because a lot of times I'll be watching some maybe like old comedy or something like that, and it just has like real homophobic or real sexist stuff in it, and
yeah,
I'm just like, I don't want to watch this movie anymore. It's a waste of time. And so like,
sure.
do you think it's still valuable to continue watching those movies, and maybe is it even valuable to even keep them around or rewatch them, or is it more like this is what it is, I'm gonna move on from it?
That's a good question too. I think I'm struggling with the binariness of that choice you've offered me of
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
are we watching or are we not watching? I think people watch a variety of stuff for a variety of reasons, right? Like
Hmm.
like you said in the first question you asked, like, people thinking of film as something to edify or enlighten them versus thinking of film as a distraction versus any other number of reasons to watch a
Hmm.
film. Um, so the old, yeah, I don't know, 90s 2000s comedies that we return to as a sort of comfort food,
Hmm.
carry with them all these um, historical signifiers of what the discourse was like and what the culture was like at the time
Hmm.
that are now cringeworthy. Sure, one response could be to just stop watching them. Another response could be to lean into that discomfort, as I said earlier, and
Mm.
and analyze and think through, like, what is it about the culture that um, is being expressed here that I can now see more clearly than maybe I did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, Another response could be, I don't know, to just keep watching them uncritically. I'm sure
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people do, is just to say, like, well, that was a different time, and I'm just going to enjoy
I
it
get
anyway,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And I think somewhere in between all three of those kind of responses, it just, we all fall somewhere on that spectrum, depending on the film, depending on our
Hmm.
relationship to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm comfortable telling your audience to feel guilty for like indulging in some of those pleasures,
Yeah.
but I do think it's worth being, to use, there's this feminist culture critic called Anita Sarkeesian, and she uses this phrase, be critical of the media that you love. And I really like that
Mm.
way of putting it, because like the critical the critique and the love can both occupy the same
Yeah.
sentence, the same person, the same heart. Like we can still love a thing and be willing to have some critical distance between us and the parts of the thing that are harmful.
Yeah.
I think, like, um, to go back to your earlier question of like films that maybe shouldn't have been made or whatever. Like
Hmm.
a metaphor that keeps coming to my head is to think of films like people. Like it's it's less fruitful to wonder whether a person should or shouldn't exist, and it's more fruitful usually to just examine what is the impact of this person in the world or in my life or
Mm.
in the relationships around them or in the communities around them. Obviously, depending on how powerful the person is, we expand that scope on like how we think about our moral feelings or obligations about that person, right? So if
Yeah.
a person is a senator or a king or a president, then uh, when we think about our feelings about them, we think about what their impact is on a very global scale. When
Yeah.
the person is just like a brother or an uncle or a sister or a mother, then we usually think in smaller scale of like, what is their impact in my life, right?
Hmm.
Very rarely do I find it fruitful to think like, uh, to hypothesize about what the world is like without that king or senator or mother or brother or whoever,
Yeah.
like, because we don't live in that world without them. What we do live in is a world that's been impacted by the relationships, the power structures, the communities that exist, right?
Hmm.
And I think the same thing is true of art and film. So there's films that have had a big impact on the culture that have maybe been toxic in certain ways, and instead
Hmm.
of trying to cancel them or redeem them or embrace them or reject them, maybe my way of rejecting that binary is just to say, whether you watch it or rewatch it or not, can we be thoughtful about what these films or shows have done in the world or in at least
Yeah.
our lives and in our
Yeah.
hearts, right?
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. And by the way, thank you so much for kind of like calling out that binary because I do see now, especially how both can exist. I love that. Be critical of the movies you love. Who was it that said that again?
Anita Sarkeesian. Yeah,
Anita Sarkeesian. That I
yeah.
love that so much because I think that's sort of a philosophy I'm really trying to embrace in like all aspects of my life. Is just trying to get rid of the binary or the divide of like good and bad. It's really just it's all relative in understanding how it is impacting your own life and how it's impacting your own perceptions and things like that. And honestly, this is so valuable for me to hear you talk about this and how film can really do that for us because and then I also just wanted to point out, like, I think it's also really important that you kind of specified that trying to say, or trying to develop these binaries of like this film is bad, this film is good, then and creating that sort of censorship and that sort of like propaganda sphere right there is just it's going to be dangerous in the long run. And it's more important if we have a sense of self and like an emotional intelligence to be able to interact with those things, understand what we can value from it, understand what we can be critical of for it, and then move forward. And then the last thing, I specifically love how you relate that to people, because that's a really good point. I think we a lot of people are quick to try and say like, oh, this person, Donald Trump, should not exist, and it's like, but he does exist, and he has made a huge impact, and we have to admit it. We have to understand that impact. We have to work through that impact. It's not as simple as just banning him from Twitter and then everything's all better kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I actually really, really like that. That's super valuable. And I guess it was just going to kind of bring me to um, this point of like, what? So then, what do we do with film when we move forward from it? When we do experience
Mhm.
something and we want to actually take those experiences into our lives? Because I think one thing that I've been struggling with personally is like when I'm watching a movie or when I'm watching a TV show, I kind of see it as fundamentally a type of propaganda. I see it fundamentally as like, for one thing, I know it's a narrative. I know that it is a subjective point of view that I'm trying to
Sure.
incorporate. And then sometimes I'm just like, yeah, but it's like it's propaganda. And if I and like seeing what it's trying to like force into my mindset or into my psyche, sometimes I'm just like, maybe I don't want to watch movies. Maybe I don't want to watch TV. It's I think it's a very unpopular opinion, for one thing. But I'm curious, like what I could do instead, because I mean the truth is I actually do love movies. I love TV, and I think there are obviously a lot of people do. And so what are we do? What can we do to incorporate those and then move forward from it?
I appreciate that, and maybe surprisingly, as a film scholar, maybe this is surprising. I sympathize deeply with that
Yeah.
ambivalence and that feeling of like, maybe like a lot of my colleagues. Sometimes we have this like reductive joke in film studies circles of like, movies are bad, actually. Like, just look at each other after talking about what we're studying or what we're researching. Yeah, I think films are bad. Um, just in general, and obviously sometimes we go on the opposite end of that, after watching a really moving or thoughtful
Mhm.
or incredible film, we look at each other with a sigh of relief of like, oh yeah, I'm glad this thing that we've all decided to study is like actually good. But like that's we're joking about the binary because it's obviously more complicated than that. But
Yeah.
I relate to this feeling that you're expressing of like watching a lot of especially mainstream narrative film. um, People who are thoughtful of like political struggle, class struggle, um, power structures, ideology will often notice, as you've noticed, that like,
Mhm.
man, a lot of this is just propaganda. A lot of
Yeah.
this is just trying to get us to accept the status quo of a capitalist, like
Mhm.
militarized
Police
state
state.
of affairs, right? That the happy ending, um,
Mm.
the the reliance on individualistic versus collectivist storytelling, right?
Mm.
It's all feeding into these very dominant ideological values
Mhm.
that is, once you start seeing the pattern, it's hard to shake this feeling of like, am I just consuming like an ounce of Kool-Aid every time I sit
Yeah.
down to watch something? So I appreciate that discomfort, and I think I have two prescriptions um, that might be helpful. One is the thing that we've been talking about, just this act of um, critical engagement. I think can
Mhm.
be really generative. It can also be very tiring. It can
Yeah.
also be very. It can be a lot of like labor,
Mhm.
intellectual and emotional effort goes into uh, you know seeing the latest big blockbuster thing and then having to unpack all the stuff that it was trying to brainwash you into and
Yeah.
accepting. Like I can see how that kind of work can feel daunting and demoralizing after doing it a lot. But I do think it's worthwhile work, and I
Mm.
think most people don't um, want to completely cut out mainstream media from
Yeah.
their lives and mainstream art and entertainment. And so I think the best thing that folks can do who have a steady diet of um, mainstream entertainment is to just constantly as humanly possible try to do that kind of critical work and try to unpack Um, the the way I explain ideology to my students often is just what is being taken for granted,
Mm-hmm.
what is being left unsaid, right?
Ooh.
And if we do that work of like watching a movie and then wondering what is being assumed as normal in the way that this movie portrays reality or portrays its narrative stakes or portrays its emotional, whatever, um, that can be really worthwhile and generative work. But obviously, all the caveats of like how hard that is to do and how
Yeah.
taxing that can be are in play. The second prescription, an alternate possibility that one can do both, but would be to seek out more radical art.
Yeah.
There's a whole world of subversive, radical, non-mainstream, non-Hollywood um, film and media and storytelling and experimental stuff
Mm-hmm.
and stuff from the margins that's out there that's just begging to be seen and that unfortunately doesn't often have very wide distribution.
Mm-hmm.
um, and the more I think that people um, seek out that stuff, the more film can live up to that aspirational, Ebert quote that we started with
Mm-hmm.
of being an empathy generating machine. Because um, if the imagination of a film is limited by um, the capitalist machine of Hollywood, then now I'm turning Ebert's metaphor on back on Ebert. He's not here to defend himself, but
That's
yeah,
fine.
there is something almost insidious about that machine, right? That
Yeah.
machine churning out. Um, I'm borrowing from your listener should read some Adorno and Horkheimer. Have written an essay called "The Culture Industry" that talks a lot about
Mm.
this and about like the way in which culture as this kind of ideological apparatus, um, top down, kind of uh, seeps into our collective kind of imagination and the way
Mm-hmm.
that we see the world, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's all to say that like I think where Horkheimer and Adorno are a little bit pessimistic, my optimism is in the cracks in between the cogs of that machine. I think
Mm-hmm.
that there are pieces of radical art out there that are worth finding. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Okay, here I'm going to go even more optimistic, but I think even in the most blatantly commercial, mainstream Hollywood art, there can be moments of radical subversion,
Mm.
right? There can be moments of deep empathy. There can be moments or glimpses of something transcendent. Um,
Do you have any examples of that?
that's
Probably hard to pull right out of your hat, but
I mean, I'm going to use the most basic. Here's a very basic, often talked about example, which is Star Wars, right?
yeah.
Star Wars, owned by the biggest company in entertainment, um, clearly this huge multimedia franchise that exists to serve capital and to make
Mm-hmm.
money and to sell toys, can often, I think, be liberatory and
Mm.
powerful and even spiritually moving and like
Yeah.
politically like meaningful. I sympathize with and probably agree with most of the arguments against Star Wars from the political um, point of view of like how it's milk toast or how its metaphors are so basic that um, both the left and the right can see themselves in the heroes,
Yeah.
or can tell themselves that they see themselves in the heroes. And as
Yeah.
much as people on the left like to say like, no, it was always anti-Vietnam, it was always, like episode 3 was anti-Bush, episode 4 was anti-Vietnam, like there's all these arguments we can make in favor of like Star Wars has always been trying to be a radical text. Like
Mm-hmm.
the truth of the matter is that Star Wars is very archetypical and relatable to everyone, which is part of
Yeah.
why it's so popular. And that's the root of maybe the most trenchant critique of it, which is that its its iconography is so steeped in meaning that it almost becomes meaningless. It becomes
Yeah.
this thing
It's
that
almost like
anyone can map
cliche.
onto. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes a signifier that points to nothing or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I, all of that is to say, I accept and acknowledge those counter arguments, but I also think that there are things in Star Wars that strike me as like really powerful. And
Yeah.
this is where the subjectivity comes in that we started with, right? Of how when you bring your body into a movie theater, you're bringing all these subjectivities, experiences, values, biases, traumas, whatever. Uh, and so I think it's up to the individual audience member to try to bring what they can to a film,
Mm.
as much as it's possible to do so. And I think in some cases you can look at a film like, let's say, The Last Jedi, for example, and you can see something. Um, you can see things with radical potential in that
Mm-hmm.
story or in the way it's presented. I did a video essay a few years ago about the porgs, those little like puffin
Yeah.
creatures. um, and my argument was basically like, this is why the porgs matter. The porgs are this like latest instantiation of the Star Wars franchise, always being interested in ecosystems and creatures,
Hmm.
in the way in which like all these non-human animals and entities, sentient or non-sentient, are all connected, and the fight against these evil space fascists involves um, everybody, including
Including the
little
porgs.
puffin
Yeah.
birds, including walking carpet bear man, including human characters, including non-human characters, including like everything is that's my reading of the ecology of Star Wars as this
Mm-hmm.
like uh, expression of radical solidarity with non-human entities. But to what extent is that an intentional main theme or through line? I don't know. Maybe it's on someone's mind in the creature design department or on the script level. Maybe George Lucas has some of these thoughts swimming around his head, but I don't want to give them too much credit if it's not warranted, and I don't know if it matters to
Mm-hmm.
what extent that's intentional. If I see it there, then it's there, right?
Yeah.
If it's something that I take from the film that I find meaningful, then I think that's enough. I think sometimes people are sheepish about like trying to find that meaning, and they want to say like, well, I don't know if that was intentional, I might just be making shit up. But
Mm-hmm.
like, no, we're always making shit up, but we're making shit up about everything, about the relationships that we have, about the institutions that we interact with, about the art that we interact with. We're always interpreting, we're
Mm-hmm.
always responding. It's an act of creation, I think,
Yeah.
to watch a film. So
Yeah.
you don't have to just passively say, I will accept the version of this that I think was intended. We can actively look at a film and find and make meaning in
That's
it, I think.
awesome. And it can immobilize you for something to make real active change in your actual environment, especially if it does,
Yeah.
I love that because if it really does tell you like, oh yeah, I got this from the movie that, I'm everything's connected and that we all have to be kind of interdependent in order to build like real meaningful change. And then you actually do something with that. That is important. And
Yeah.
that makes it so it doesn't fucking matter whether they intended to put it that way because it's actually building something more beautiful and more meaningful. And I really
Yeah.
like that. And I was also thinking while you're like kind of what you were saying, where how that capitalist culture machine is kind of, maybe it's driving the whole creation of these projects and these films and this art, but regardless of that, there are human beings with real spirituality, with real emotion, with real feelings, and with real expression that is embedded all throughout that entire process. So where you say, you're worried about being an optimist about seeing those cracks in that capitalist culture machine and that empathetic machine, I think it's accurate. I think it's very accurate because our humanity and our ideas and the connection that we all share is going to be embedded within that no matter what. And it's kind of like you said with those archetypes from Star Wars. There's a reason that it was so powerful. It's because it like resonates with so many people all across
Yeah.
the globe. It's accounting the hero's journey, which is just this really fundamental experience of being human. And I really appreciate that you laid that out because I think that gives me something to value. Though it really gives me something to say, okay, I can take this in, understand my own interactions and my own reactions to this film or to this art, and then understand what I want to do with it, what meaning I want to make from it, what do I want to move forward with it. Because I really was kind of paralyzed by this idea that like, oh, I'm just like sticking a tube in my mouth and just sitting there consuming, and that's all it is. But I mean, it sounds like that was just my perception of it. That's just what I was deciding to take away from the film, and I really appreciate that you laid out that it obviously doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, I think we can. I think, I mean, this all relates to that first question that you asked. But yeah, I think people have power, more
Mhm.
power than maybe they give themselves credit for,
Yeah.
to um, to make meaning out of the universe and out of the art that they encounter in
Hmm.
a way that's generative to them. And that's, you know, I keep talking out of both sides, or hopping the fence in all my responses to you. But
That's
like,
needed, man. I appreciate you calling out the binary because it's important. The nuance is where
it's
everything exists.
yeah, it's tough because on one hand, everything I just said, everything you just said about rejecting that deterministic kind of flow of the tube of the art pushing meaning into your mind without you having any say. Um, like, yes, you do have power. The other side of that, the other side of the fence, is that um, we we there is a danger of overestimating the amount of power
Hmm.
that you have,
Yeah.
right? Or the amount of ability that you have to decode things that might be super deeply embedded, right?
Hmm.
Or entrenched. Again, going back to that, intro definition of ideology that I use for my students, of like what is being taken for granted,
Hmm.
right? And sometimes that's not on screen, that's like in us, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the film's trying to push us out of our ideological bubble, and we can't because we don't see it. We don't even know that
Ooh.
we have these assumptions in our
Hmm.
hearts, right? Of like how the world should be, or what gender should be, or what heroism should look like, or what a narrative arc should look like, or to use your example of Star Wars, like what a hero's journey looks like. that
Yeah.
that archetype has ideological ramifications, and if we bring those ramifications with us and then we don't know that they're inside of us, even a film that's trying to critique them can fall flat on, like, we may not have the
Mm.
power to be moved by it if we aren't introspective enough to see um, the biases at play in our own minds and in our own interactions
Yeah.
with the world and with power structures around us.
I think where the real value comes from that though is this discussing films and discussing like other
Sure.
people's reactions and interactions with it, because that's where it becomes most fun. I love when I'll watch a movie and I just walk out of it and I'm like, I don't even know what to think about that. That kind of fucked with me. I don't even know what to think. And then I talk with somebody about it, and then I'm like, "Oh, this was your reaction to it. I didn't even think about that. Maybe I need to rewatch it with this mindset, or I need to kind of open up in
Yeah.
this way." It's like, "Oh, really? That part kind of hit me this way." And I think that's where we can kind of coalesce that nuance, where you really can kind of build true meaning from it, and that's where we build connection and a real value from these. Because that I think that's when it is most valuable, is when we can actually allow ourselves to either see or just openly express how it affected us, how we reacted to it, and then
Yeah.
also being able to understand how it can react, how other people can react to it. Because that I mean that's always just interesting, and that's always what's the fun part about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I am You're preaching to the choir on that one. I'm fully on board with that model of um, the encounter with the art can only go so far
Yeah.
on this introspective level. We have to collide with other people,
Mm.
and with their experiences for that spark to really set off. I think you're absolutely right.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I find that really valuable. And it kind of just that whole discussion on Star Wars kind of brings me to my next question, where I wanted to see if you feel like film does or even should have like a vision for humanity. Like, because I feel like a lot of
Hmm.
futuristic films specifically, they try to portray like this is what life is going to be like, right? I can't remember what movie I can't remember what movie I was watching, but it was like about some guy coming from the future back to see his like past self or whatever. It was like a new one. It has Ryan Reynolds in it. I'm blanking on it.
Hmm.
Anyways, and it
Yeah.
was it was really funny because there was one part where it's like, oh, what's the future like? And it's like, oh, well, we don't have money. And he's like, you don't have money? He's like, no, of course we have money. And I just remember thinking, I was like, why can't the future not have money? Like,
Right.
like that's something that's like in my peripheral right now because I volunteer for the Moneyless Society. But then it just kind of started me on this whole train of thought of like what is this film trying to portray to us? Like whenever we are portraying the future, we're trying to tell people this is what the future will look like. And I wanted to see if you think if it even does that, or even if it should.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm hesitant to prescribe what film should or shouldn't do, but one thing that I think film uh, films about the future, to narrow the scope of this question to the kinds of genres that seem most relevant, right? These sci-fi or speculative fiction
Yeah.
films that imagine another world. I think something that they do is they comment on the present by ostensibly giving us a vision of a future, right? The on the surface level of most futuristic sci-fi is like we're giving you an imaginative vision of what our society could be like in 200 or 2000 years or whatever. But under that surface is almost always um, like deeply seated critiques of or observations on what the sci-fi author is noticing in our society today, right? And which is why when you watch like I'm blanking on like a good example of this, but when you watch sci-fi films from say like the 1970s or 1990s or whatever that pretend to be about the 26th century or the 32nd century or whatever, they're usually in retrospect, looking back on it in the 2020s, they're usually about the 70s or about the 90s. Like you can tell looking back on these films, like it was the end of the 90s and like such and such was on everyone's mind, and that's why this film is so obsessed with such and such. And there's exceptions to that. There are some films that like seem to be prophetic or seem to be speaking to concerns that no one was really interested in until 40 years later or whatever. But I think for the most part, films are always talking about the present, even when they pretend to be talking about the past or the future. They Films are made from a historical and political context, and they speak to the concerns of the artists that live in that context, right? And so even if they are set in some kind of future, I think typically what they reflect even more than the future, whatever that means, is what are we worried about right now, or what are we concerned with right now, right?
That
I
makes
don't
a
know.
lot of sense.
I don't know if that answers. Maybe that
No,
avoids answering your
no,
question.
I think it really does answer, because like, I could, because the only reason I really asked that is it sort of ties in with this idea of like film being a type of propaganda, right? And I'm
Sure.
trying to sort of grapple with this idea of like, oh, should I embrace it or should I reject it as propaganda? And so I'm like, oh, well, if we're going to embrace it as propaganda, maybe we should use it to build like ideas for utopian visions, right? If we could just be
Sure.
like, hey, let's mainstream and make it like really digestible and enticing to portray a future that is just going to be like really really beautiful for everyone, and sort of
Yeah.
lean into that propaganda. And so the reason I really asked that was to just be like, dude, like it's like I wonder if we should be moving in that direction, kind of thing. But I
Sure.
like how I think you really did truly answer the question, because we could do that, but really all it's going to be doing is saying like, here's the problems that we're witnessing now, and this is what we want the future to look like if we solve them. And
Yeah.
is that essentially what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it together. That yeah, if let's jump into a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Let's say that you and I make a movie today that speaks to what we collectively envision as like a perfect society 100 years from now, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who watch that movie 500 years from now maybe we'll have a different perspective on like what we think we're saying, right?
Yeah.
Maybe if we make it today and we say, okay, it's 2022, but we're making a movie about what 21, 22 should look like in our view.
Mm-hmm.
Future historians and audiences are going to look back at that and be like, oh yeah, this is the kind of stuff that was on people's minds in 2022. These were the
Mm-hmm.
problems that they thought were crucial, and look at all the problems that they didn't think were crucial, right? Like that's the blind spots in retrospect are going to be
Yeah.
glaring, right? What like the
Yeah.
example that you used of that sci-fi that couldn't fathom a future without money, which is silly because Star Trek has been imagining a future without
Yeah,
money
that's
for
right.
decades now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like for that film that you cited, to not even know how to think about a future without money without making it into a joke, is indicative of a blind spot that you and I can see it contemporaneously, but maybe a lot of audiences will just take at face value,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly I'd imagine audiences from the future will look back on it and be like, yeah, why did this comedy take for granted that would be an impossibility? I would hope
Mm-hmm.
there's the optimist in me. I would hope that
Yeah.
future audiences could look back on that and see it as an absurd omission or assumption.
Mm-hmm.
But Yeah, I mean, is that to say that we shouldn't or that we should? Like, no, like, I think it's great to make films about utopian ideas that that society could benefit from
Mm-hmm.
normalizing and contemplating together, right? I
Yeah.
think it's great for art to push the what's that phrase? The Overton window, is that what it's called?
I don't
Like
know.
the public consciousness is like the public
Like their boundaries.
acceptance, the boundaries
Mm.
of like what is acceptable or what is something that we can
Like
fathom,
taboo.
right?
Mm. Mm.
Yeah,
Oh, I see. I
I
see.
think it's great to push that window
Mm-hmm.
and to try to make art that um, that envisions uh, that gives people something to look toward, right?
Yeah.
What's that old like activist maxim of you can't be what you can't see, right?
Mm.
Which is why the maxim that we use a lot in media studies is representation matters, and you see that phrase has seeped into the mainstream discourse about film, right? Representation
Mm-hmm.
matters. And what people are saying when they say that is that we want to see ourselves. We want to
Yeah.
see our present and our future in the films that purport to be telling us our stories.
Yeah.
And so I think the real answer to your question is yes. I do think that um, that's the shorter version of my answer to your question. Is I do think it would be worthwhile and generative for artists to give us better and more radical visions of the future. But my caveats to that, yes, are to say that like whenever we try to do that, we're always going to have blind spots. We're always going to be speaking
Mm.
to what we think is important now. There's also like another caveat that I haven't mentioned is just that um, um, I think there's value in dystopia and tragedy as well. Like the
Mm.
flip side of utopia
Yeah.
is to, um, well, let me put it this way: maybe the the drawback of utopian storytelling or world building is that um, it can lead an audience to imagine that future as inevitable, right?
Yes. I'd
This
actually.
whole like arc of history going towards good kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. That like when Dr. King says history arcs towards justice or whatever, he he didn't mean inevitably, but I
Yeah.
think a
Yeah.
lot of like neoliberal like kind of centrist optimist takes on politics make the mistake of assuming that the world just automatically gets better the way that a river flows downstream,
Mm-hmm.
which is not the case. Um, the future only gets better if everyone fights for a better future.
Yeah.
And so one of the drawbacks I think of um, maybe hyper focusing on uh, utopian world building is that we
Y-
risk implying this is where we will be in 1,000
Yeah.
years without letting the audience sit in the discomfort of what that space looks like between now and then and what the
Yeah.
struggle looks like between now and then, right?
Yeah. Oh shit, dude, that is so good. I mean, I'm seeing like an overall theme of this conversation that's just sort of like this balance, right? A sort of a
Yeah.
balance, not trying to say like, oh, it's all good or it's all bad or we should be striving for all good and trying to avoid the bad or anything like that. It's just this natural balance. Because I really felt what you were saying, where like I was like, oh, if, like all we're ever portraying is dystopia. Like it was all the rage to have all these dystopian like movies and
Sure.
novels and things like that. And so I'm like, how do we not realize that we're driving ourselves towards that by giving that its energy? But I
Mm,
and so my reaction, my overcorrection, I think, was to say like we should be driving our energy towards utopia, and I see the value in both based on what you're saying. I do understand that like trying to say, okay, yeah, we're just gonna pump out a bunch of like Hollywood films about utopia and this like beautiful, like glorious thing is going to somehow inevitably lead us there. Not quite.
mm,
And I specifically love that you pointed out how trying to encapsulate the future is going to necessarily have blind spots, and those blind spots could create dystopia, and so we have to be able to keep those in balance and keep those in check in order to actually get ourselves to the place that we want to go.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
I think at the crux of this too is like either the dystopian fiction that you're describing, that I agree is like very prevalent and probably a problem in the way that you've described, right?
Mhm.
Um, Either both that and the utopian world building projects that we could imagine might be really really great. Um, the drawback of both is just this limitation of narrative storytelling in general, which
Mm.
I think like part of something that I've opened my eyes more and more to in studying film in these past few years is just like how I used to think of film primarily as narrative storytelling, because that's
Hmm.
the kind of film that's
Most common.
most common, most accessible. Um, but the more and more that I've seen non-narrative kind of experimental films, the more I've opened my eyes to this idea, or even just watch narrative films without paying attention to the narrative and like paying
Hmm.
attention to other things, right? The more I've realized like, yeah, the problem with narrative is that it ties everything up really tidily
Mm.
in like a neat little bow. And whether you're telling a tragedy or a comedy, whether you're telling a dystopian story or a utopian story, inevitably you're gonna frame it in what
And
in
like a
a
packaged
package,
experience.
yeah, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's quote unquote rules to screenwriting about
Hmm.
how long the first act should be, how long the second act should be, and like
Hmm.
there's this kind of like there's these conventions of like what a story looks like or how it's shaped. And even just the act of telling a story, I think, has political limitations, and like
Mm.
um, you're inevitably going to flatten, I think, the human experience
Ooh.
into something that um, doesn't look like the life that you and I or anyone is actually living. You and I aren't living through a story. We're not living through
Mm.
a narrative arc with a beginning, middle, and end, with like a
Yeah.
rising action and a climax, and like we're living through something that's a lot more complex than that. It's a lot more nonlinear. We're jumping between different kind of emotional arcs all the time. We're starting and stopping different um, relationships and different paradigms and different like mind states, and we're ebbing and flowing in spiritual and psychological and political and economic kind of like everything's swirling around, and we're
Yeah.
connected to like I said earlier with like the porgs and all the animals in Star Wars. Like we're always connected to these other systems and these other organisms and these other ecosystems and these other agents in the universe, and there's no way that a 2-hour narrative film um,
Can capture all
can
that.
really capture that. And stories are powerful. I obviously don't deny the importance of telling stories, but I think one thing that almost always falls short, the narrative cinema almost always falls short of, is accounting for the complexity of what
Life is.
time and space actually feels like when we live
Yeah.
through life. Yeah.
Holy shit. I'm so glad you brought that up because that's actually something I have noticed because like not specifically that like our lives aren't narrativized, but that just I remember like watching some movies and watching some films and I'm just like I feel like this is painting a picture for people that just isn't reality. And most of the time
Mhm.
it's not, right? And even if it is like a true story or it's like this true experience, you didn't have something I always think of is like if someone's like sitting there like like curled in a corner like scared, and if you're actually experiencing that, you're not having dramatic emphasis like dramatic music rising around you. You're not having
Sure.
something zooming in on your consciousness or anything. I feel like when you're actually experiencing a traumatic event or something like that, there's like this stillness and this weird just like limbo in space that is really hard to capture in film. And I'm sure it's
Yeah.
been captured before, but I really love that you pointed that out. And I think that was something that was like making me sort of feel adverse to film, was just being like, this isn't
Mm.
capturing the human experience, and fuck, it should be for some reason. And but like I think it is important to realize the, like you said, like the value of narratives and the value of stories and what it can do for us. It actually makes me think of this thing that his name's Sadhguru said. He was like, don't let books dictate your life. He's like, books are meant to inspire you. And so I'm kind of
Mm.
seeing that with film and narrative in general. It's like, don't let it try to dictate or like like tell you that this is what reality is and this is what the human experience is. It's like this should inspire you to have a feeling, to have a reaction, to have an emotion, and then move forward in reality with that.
Hmm.
So I really like that you pointed that out.
That's a good way of putting it. Of resisting the urge to narrativize our own lives the way that film is narrativized or the way that books are
Mm-hmm.
narrativized. I like that
I think that's
advice.
I think that's sort of like I think that's sort of human ego doing that. I think that's why stories and narratives like speak so much to us, because that's all ego is. You know, ego is a story of ourselves that we've created. And so when we
Sure.
watch films and movies, we try to identify with those stories and either, you know, incorporate that into our own sense of self, into our own ego. And so I feel like that's kind of what I'm seeing there. And I just love that you pointed that out. One thing that I do want to bring up, because you
Yeah.
brought it up earlier, was representation in films. Because this is actually something that it kind of ties into what we were just talking about, where I do agree that representation matters, because by not representing people, like people of color, or like people from the LGBTQ community, right? We're marginalizing them, and we're silencing them, and we're keeping their stories out of film, and we're keeping their stories out of the mainstream culture. So I see the value of that. I think one thing that I've been critical of, I just want to, I feel like I might be wrong about it, is trying to just simply represent people sort of in an inauthentic way.
Sure.
Like maybe because I mean, if we sort of uh, I'm going to say this for fear of treading on some pretty sketchy topics. So
Okay.
let's say that there's like there's this typical experience of being black that I have a bias of, right? Where I may assume that to be black is to experience a lot of racial prejudice, maybe even a poverty and things like that. And then I go and watch a film where they don't experience any of that, where it's just like perfect, and it's mostly like a white experience, something that maybe I identify with because I have explicitly had those experiences. I
Hmm.
wonder if that type of representation is harmful, or do you think it's sort of helpful in the same way of like, portraying movies of or film of utopia where we're moving towards that direction? Or is it even like something that those communities even would want to be represented in?
Sure. Yeah, that's a big debate
Yeah.
in film studies and in film criticism these days, and I think a lot of cultural critics have been grappling with the very questions you're asking. Blanking on the name, Stuart Hall, I think is his name. There's a cultural critic who writes about what he calls um, politics of representation versus representation of politics. And the
Mm,
distinction he's trying to make is like, on one hand, there's this kind of shallow, like tokenizing, like, hey, we're
mm,
putting one of you on screen, and like that's the politics. That's the end of the praxis. That's like
yeah.
all there is just this kind of like presentation of a body as if that's all the work that there is to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And then he contrasts that with what he calls um, the representation of politics, which is what if that act of representation was cognizant of and deeply like confronting actual um, lived experiences and political struggles of that marginalized group that you purport
Mm,
to be serving with your
mm-hmm.
representation, right? So
Yeah.
there's another scholar as well that I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can, later, if you remind me, I can send it to you. You can put it in the show notes. But there's another essay I read recently about this quote unquote positive representation, right, or
Mm-hmm.
positive image. The idea of a lot of critics for a while um, in the 90s, 2000s were pretty obsessed with this notion of like positivity and like, oh, we need positive images of such and such group, right? Which is true and good, and rooted in a desire that, like you said with your comparison to the utopian desire of like, we want aspirational things that are hopeful and they give us something to look for, and you can't beat what you can't see, right? So we
Yeah.
need to see, you know it is meaningful that like Bruce Lee is this like Asian transnational action superstar, and it is meaningful that Bruce Lee combats the kind of demasculinization and desexualization and disempowering of Asian men on screen that
Mhm.
preceded him, right? At least in Western media. So like that means something,
Yeah.
surely. But the counterpoint to that is that we can't just have positive representation. We can't just have marginalized groups content with here's your hero, here's your uh, queer hero, or your black hero, or your Asian
Mhm.
hero, your woman hero who's like just doing the thing that the oppressor does in every other movie, but from the
Mm.
point of view of the oppressed instead, or with the body of someone who is oppressed. And like,
Yeah.
what does that actually do? Does that actually confront? So like the counterpoint to that obviously is like, if you lean too hard, this is the main theme I'm sensing of, as you noted earlier, of our
Yeah.
conversation, of like, you can overcompensate either direction, right? If
Yeah.
you overcompensate towards positive representation, quote unquote positive, then you run the risk of racistly bending over backwards to try not to be racist, and you create this new stereotype of like that flattens and and doesn't account for the complexities of an authentic experience of being in that
Yeah.
community. And then if you overcompensate too much the other direction, then you create just oppression porn.
Mm.
Just
Yeah.
movie after movie of like people being oppressed, or of people being poor, or
Mhm.
like people, like if every depiction of people of color on screen is gonna be related to crime thrillers or drugs, or if someone's always downtrodden. Someone goes into an actor goes into the audition week after week and is constantly offered the same role of like a downtrodden person, or a
Mhm.
prostitute, or whatever. Like, then the group that they are hoping to represent is is always going to be stuck in that
Yeah.
corner, no matter how earnestly the filmmakers that they're auditioning for might want to say something real or meaningful about that
Yeah.
oppression that they're
Mhm.
depicting, right? So you can overcompensate either way. I think if we have too much of the kind of blind positivity, then we ignore real problems, and we just create a palatable um, minority representation that is comfortable for the
The audience.
oppressor,
Mhm.
for
Yeah,
the audience
yeah,
who,
yeah.
we'll take your example of like, if you just have Sidney Poitier movies, and that's the only black representation that we have, then that caters to the white gaze in
Mhm.
a way that it caters to white audiences and their expectations of what blackness looks like or should look like, what
Mhm.
black masculinity looks like, what black honor looks like. And Sidney Poitier is great. I have no qualms with the value of what Sidney Poitier does as an artist. But black representation has to be more than Sidney Poitier. Asian representation
Yeah.
has to be more than Bruce Lee. And as you can see in the video, I have a poster of Bruce Lee in my room. I clearly think that what he does and what he represents is important, but Asian representation on screen has to be more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that coin is that it can't all just be in the muck of here's how this
Oppression
group
and
has been
mhm.
oppressed, and then you just make movie after movie about um, about the status quo, which then no matter how well intentioned that may be, the audience inevitably
Maintains
begins
that.
to accept that
Mhm.
and maintain that status quo of like, well, I guess that's just how those people are. And
Yeah.
like, no one says that out loud, but I think that's what's underlined by an overabundance of that kind of overcorrection. So
Yeah, and I think it's really like what you're saying, where either way it's flatlining. It's
yeah,
flattening their experience, where it's really always a very three-dimensional human experience that's happening. And I think that what that's telling me is that there just simply needs to be more
it needs to be
representation.
more.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah,
especially like in directing those things, because then you're actually getting those people who are saying, this is my experience of this, or this is an experience that I know of that is very palpable, or that is very present, or something like that. And I love that, because then it's not a matter of saying like, oh, representation is only sullied. It's like, no, representation just is what it is, and we need to have more of it so that we can have a more balanced view
yeah.
of these people's lives, so that we can cater to all audiences, and really cater to all experiences. I think
Yeah, a
it's
good
really
example
vital.
of that is like 20 what was it, 2017, when Wonder Woman came out. I think that
Hmm.
was 2017. um I remember a lot of the discourse around that movie asked a lot of that movie, right? People were like wringing their hands over like, is this the best um depiction of like
A female
female
hero. Yeah.
the female hero, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a hero, what it means to be a good, like people were just asking a lot of this movie, and I think that's an inevitable symptom of um a scarcity, right? Like
Yeah.
you said, we just need more. If we had more women heroes in action movies or in superhero movies, no matter how narrowly you want to define the boundaries of this query, like if there was just more in that space, then every time there's a new movie with a female lead, we wouldn't have to ask ourselves like, is this
Is this enough?
womanhood? Is this 2.5 hour movie like the epitome of what a woman is? Like that's too much. That's too much to ask of any film. Um, but when any group kind of like gets a big break
Mhm.
in mainstream culture like that, those same discourses always pop up. It's like, oh, does this movie really speak to the Black experience? Does this movie really speak to the queer experience?
Mhm.
And like no movie can pass that test, because every movie is just about a small select group of
Mhm.
characters, right? Um, and so inevitably the answer is going to be like, well, no. um, which which I don't think is always the movie's fault. It's just the symptom of a scarcity we have of we don't have enough, right?
Mhm.
Um, there are the, there are so many stories that could be told, so many ways to interact with this world. There are so many um, different life paths that illustrate what it means to be a woman or queer or Asian or black or white or whatever. Like, and um, until all those different types of walk of life are not just represented on screen, but like um,
Given.
distributed and
Mhm.
given attention,
Yeah.
then we're always going to be repeating the same question of like, oh man, that movie was really good about such and such, but it didn't really speak to this other thing. Like Crazy Rich Asians comes out, and everyone in the Asian community that I'm following online is like complaining about how it doesn't represent enough um, South Asian. Like it's really just about East Asian like rich people.
Yeah.
It doesn't speak to Asianness
Yeah.
broadly enough for people who are critical of it. And that critique I think is valid, but it's also like an impossible bar to like.
We got
You
to
can't.
include every single
Asia is a
instance of
whole
Asianness.
fucking continent. Like that's a lot of experiences to cover. So, and part of the problem is that when a movie like that comes out and hits the mainstream, the discourse around it is inevitably going to pin all those expectations on it and say like,
Mhm.
oh, finally, like a mainstream like rom-com about Asian people. Like, let's speak about what this speaks to or what this represents, and inevitably it's going to fall short, I think, of what we hope for. But yeah, the solution, like you said, is just more. We just need
Mhm.
more.
Awesome.
um yeah.
I love that, and I think that's a perfect way to start closing this podcast. Just more representation, and then the final question that I do have for you, Mr. Chris Way, is what movie should people go watch right after this podcast?
Right after this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
oh boy. um I'm gonna cheat and give you a few. Let me
That's
let me pull
fine.
up my top 100 lists on Letterboxd too. My number one favorite movie of all time, and the filmmaker that I did my master's thesis on, is Don Hertzfeldt, and he has a film called It's Such a Beautiful Day.
Ooh.
It's an hour long. It came out in 2012, but it was first released as like three separate 20-minute shorts
Mm-hmm.
in I think '06, '08, and '11, and then he kind of put them together in 2012. So It's Such a Beautiful Day by Don Hertzfeldt, 2012. It's an animated. It's kind of like an experimental animated um, feature about this stick figure man named Bill who is slowly losing his mind and his memory,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really poignant. It's sometimes darkly funny, sometimes like shocking, but I think it's deeply moving, and it portrays, um, I think, a very profound ambivalence about time and timelessness and memory, and a deep sadness about like um, how we what we take for granted, or what we think about memory and time, and our relationship to our memories and to the people around us. And I think it's really good. And
Mm.
Don Hertzfeldt has a great career over the past 2 decades of weird little experimental animated shorts, and this is his only feature, at least so far. More recently, he's done some science fiction shorts that are really, really interesting too. But it's such a beautiful day. I think I'm always eager for an excuse to plug that and to tell people to watch. I think it's my favorite film of all time, and it probably will stay in that spot for the foreseeable future.
That sounds like a beautiful one. Hell yeah. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
I'm gonna throw I'm gonna throw one more in there. I'm gonna throw two more in there.
All right. We'll allow
Okay,
it. We'll allow it.
is that all right? Is that
Yeah,
allowed?
yeah.
One. Okay, there's this film from Abbas Kiarostami from 1987 called "Where Is My Friend's House."
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's translated as "Where Is the Friend's Home,"
Mm-hmm.
but it's just this like 90-minute, very simple story about a little boy trying to find his friend's house because he accidentally took his friend's homework home with him, and he doesn't want the friend to get in trouble
Mm-hmm.
the next day when he arrives at school without his notebook, and he knows inevitably that's the very strict teacher is gonna there's gonna be problems there. So he wants to help his friend out. He has no idea where his friend lives. It's just this Iranian like village where it takes place, and it's just a lovely, heartfelt, human story that I think everyone in the world should see.
Hell yeah.
Abbas Kiarostami is a very fascinating filmmaker. He made a couple of follow-ups to that film that are increasingly meta and like self-reflexive. But that
Mm.
first one, I think, is the masterpiece. It's just such um, a minimalistic, but like emotionally
Profound.
potent,
Mm.
profound little story. Um, and then my one more uh, is this has a very similar title to the first one I mentioned, but there's a film called Life in a Day. There's actually two of these, and I haven't seen the newer one, which came out I think during the pandemic. But
Mm-hmm.
the original one, Life in a Day from 2011, 2010, 2011, is this kind of crowdsourced documentary. And I think it's really beautiful. And I think it gets to the heart of some stuff that we've been talking about
Mm-hmm.
today about like film as empathy building, resisting narrative structure, resisting individualistic ideologies. I think this film does some of that we want, or for me at least, because what this film is, it's just they reached out on YouTube. The filmmakers said, everyone send us footage of your life on this one particular day. I think it was like July something,
Mm-hmm.
2010, and they got hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage of people sending in. Here's what my life is like, right? Goat herders in the middle of nowhere, people who are suffering from chronic illness, people who were homeless, people who had Ferraris, people who were deeply conservative, deeply liberal, apolitical, everything in between, people with just making food, people like all walks of life all throughout the world.
Oh yeah.
People just took footage of what their day to day is like, people biking around country to country, people dealing with death, people getting married, whatever. And the filmmakers took all that footage and compiled it into this edited 90-minute montage, basically, of a day in the life of a handful of these people.
Wow.
So it starts in the morning with sunrise, and you get this montage of like people waking up or whatever, and it goes through the day kind of chronologically. And I think that used to be my number one film, and it's still very high up there. I think it's just a really poignant expression of this kind of collectivist urge that I have, where I
Mm.
wish that films would embrace more often of just this rejection of like a hero's journey, individualistic, like it's all about like the one person saving the world, or the one
Mm-hmm.
person going through this damnation arc or redemption arc or whatever kind of arc. And instead this film embraces just the minutia and variety of all these different lives that
Oh
aren't even really connected, other than that they happen to be existing on the same planet on the same
yeah.
day. um,
That sounds like
so that
spiritual.
that that film is, yeah, I think there's something really spiritually valuable in that, and it's available on YouTube, I think, for free. Life in a Day, 2010, 2011. There is a follow up to it from a decade later, but I haven't seen that. But I find that film really moving. There's obvious like critiques and like um, limitations in the sense that like it's obviously not going to be comprehensive. This is edited, these are choices that these filmmakers made of like what they found most compelling. But I still think that the end result is like really potentially radical and liberatory and moving. So that's my third
Awesome.
recommendation.
Those sound like amazing movies. I will definitely watch every single one of them.
Awesome.
And Chris, thank you so much for coming onto this podcast. This was a wonderful conversation, and I'd love to have more sometime if you're up for it.
Absolutely. Thanks for
Perfect.
having me.
Of course. Thanks so much, man. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Kindness Rebellion. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I know I did. It was an awesome conversation with Chris. Make sure to check out those movies he suggested. Just once again, they are It's Such a Beautiful Day by Don Hertzfeld, Where is My Friend's House by Abbas Kiarostami. Good luck spelling that one. And Life in a Day, which is a collection of different directors. These are really unique films that are, I would say, a lot more spiritual in the sense that they're just getting a more honest look at human life, and I think it's a beautiful perspective to have. So make sure to check them out and comment on this YouTube video or any of the other platforms that you're listening on to kind of engage with us and tell us what you think about the movies, because they're really valuable. Thank you so much. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Share this everywhere. Please communicate with me, talk, and let's get this conversation rolling. Let's make real change, and let's have a new interaction with our environment and our media. Thanks so much for listening.